can't do that.
All over Western Europe for a huge amount of money. We're green.
That detail was left out.
Forcibly occupying Norway. Story of an occupied Norway. It's one of these kind of whole premise is that Norway has been overall plan gets a little bit sloppy.
Let's go ahead and start.
Commission. Please silence all cell phones. May we have the roll call, please?
Commissioner Donenfeld?
Present.
Commissioner Garner has not arrived. Commissioner Hirschbein?
Present.
Commissioner Hudson?
Present.
Commissioner Song? Vice Chair Maruzzi?
Here.
And Chair Woods is excused. We have a quorum.
May we have the staff report on the posting of the agenda?
Mr. Vice Chair, the agenda was posted on Thursday, March the 7th. This meeting has been noticed and posted in accordance with state law.
Looking at the agenda, do any commissioners have any revisions to the agenda?
I move approval of the agenda.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Did you need to do that technically on the screen, or is it okay doing it the way we did it?
A voice call is fine.
Good. So this time has been set aside for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on the consent calendar, non-public hearing items, and items of general interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission. If you wish to speak on items 1A, 1B, 4A, and 5A, please come forward at this time, as these are non-public hearing items. Comments on a public hearing item may be made at the time the item is presented. Please note that the Planning Commission is prohibited from taking action on items not listed on the posted agenda. 3 minutes is allowed for each speaker. Is there anyone here who wants to comment on an item? If so, come up to the microphone, give us your name and address for the record, and proceed.
Hello, Commissioners. Sorry, I'm kind of new to this. I would like to comment on the item 1B on the consent calendar. My name is Luke Chow, and I am the store design manager in charge of the project at the Palm Springs Sephora store that we're building. And I wanted to make an exception for the sign permit to install 2 main signs that exceed the letter heights of 16 inches at the location at 175 North Palm Canyon Drive. I have brought a copy of our sign shop drawings if you'd like to look at them, but basically the idea was that the signs, I think the permit has a limit of 16 inches high for the signs, and in comparison to the tenants that are near us, it's a very small sign and it looks a little out of proportion. We have a very wide storefront, and in comparison, our neighbors have 37-inch high signs for a much smaller storefront, as well as 36 inches, excuse me, 36 inches high for our neighbor to our other side. And we are proposing a 30-inch sign for ours because we have all capital letters, but that's the branding of our sign. And so, and then we also have a presence on the back, and in that case, we would like to just go up to 18 inches to basically fill out the allowed sign space area.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other public comments at this time?
Brad Schuckart with Freehold Communities. I represent the Miralon project. Edward just informed me that there may or may not be public discussion about the item that is before you, item 4A under new business. And I just wanted to offer that we have a presentation that we'd be happy to provide, and we've got a Title 24 expert here and some window manufacturers, or at least representatives, here to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Seeing none, I close the public comment period. Yes.
I'd like to request that we remove item 1B from the consent calendar.
1B. So yeah, that's what we're doing right now, is looking at the consent calendar, determining if we want to pull anything other than 1B. I guess we have 1A if you want to pull that. Otherwise, we can go ahead and approve 1A. Actually, I'm sorry. I have a change for the minutes if we want to go down the line, though. We have 4 sets of minutes. I guess I could read the dates for them all. January 23rd, February 13th, February 27th, and there were 2. One was for a study session on the 27th, and the other was for the regular meeting. Any comments, any changes? Okay, I have one on February 13th. on page 3, where it says Vice Chair Maruzzi. I had said that I'd like to see a condition of approval that in 6 months, staff will prepare a report summarizing what has occurred since the facility went into operation. And you can scratch out has, since the facility went into operation. I distinctly remember we asked for 6 months. That's the only change I have.
Chair Maruzzi?
Yes.
I'll be abstaining on the vote for the meeting minutes of February 13th, as I was not present for that meeting.
Okay. Any other abstentions? May we have a motion to accept the consent calendar?
Are we
Yeah.
minus?
1B has been removed.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So who made the motion?
We have the,
So
we
who's
have the
seconding?
first by Commissioner Song and the second by Commissioner Hudson, and we can vote.
Very good. Passes. Now we're going to go to the public hearing portion of the, actually, we're going to just, do we discuss 1B now, or do we wait?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we can go ahead and discuss 1B now.
All right. So should we go to the procedure where we ask for the staff report and so on and
Correct.
so forth? All right. Staff report, please, on 1B.
Mr. Chair and Planning Commissioners, the request before you is a sign permit for the Sephora retailer located at 175 North Palm Canyon Drive. The applicant proposes to install 20-inch high channel letters on the rear of the business facing the Virgin Hotel site, which is to the west of the building, and 30-inch high letters on the east elevation, which faces Palm Canyon. The sign program for this building was approved by City Council on July 26 of 2017. When the council approved it, the tenant location in question was not known, so the council said that any future tenant would comply with the downtown sign ordinance guidelines, which limits letter height to 16 inches. However, the city council did approve letter heights that exceeded 16 inches, as you see in the table comparison on page 3 of your staff report. So the letter heights range from roughly 19 to 38 inches in overall letter height for the other tenants in the building. The tenant here in question does have a larger storefront facing Palm Canyon, so it would make sense that they do have signage that would be comparable and to the scale of that storefront. Thus, they are, as I said, requesting a letter height increase from 16 to 20 on the west elevation and 30 on the east elevation. And again, that is comparable with what range and size has been approved for the building in other tenant locations. So a draft resolution has been prepared and is attached to your staff report for consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions today. Thank you.
Any questions for staff?
The rear elevation, well, I guess maybe this is for the applicant, but does the rear elevation have an entrance?
They are closing that entry off.
And is there anything in our sign ordinance, either the specific for this building or generally, that requires an entrance for a sign to be placed on a building?
There is not.
Okay.
The sign program specifically identified the proposed location on the rear elevation as a potential sign,
Regardless of whether there was an entrance or not?
regardless of whether there's an entrance. I would note that there is what looks to be a door that is probably an emergency exit, and maybe the applicant can clarify, but it is definitely not one of the primary, the primary entry is going to be.
It's not a
on Palm
public
Canyon.
entrance?
I'm not sure if it is or not.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff? Should we have the applicant come up again? I think Commissioner Hirschbein has a question or two.
Commissioner, there is an exit door. It is emergency exit and loading for stock, and it's been relocated to the opposite end of the lease line in our storefront area.
So is it in that area you're proposing to put those stripes on?
The stripes are glazing, is glazing in the backside, but in that location, we've actually walled off that area because that is our stock area for the store.
So there's no doorway that you're just blocking off?
There's no, we're not blocking a door or anything in that case. There was what looked like, there were two glazed doors right next to this whole sign band and canopy and glazing area. There was right to the left of it, but we've actually closed that off and put a steel door that's further down.
That's your secure, okay.
Yeah, that's our
Okay. But this is all fixed glass. It's not a door that you're just locking off.
Correct.
And maybe this is for staff, though. Do we have any prohibitions against affixing things to glass, opaque finishes or translucent finishes to clear glass? Is there anything in our zoning ordinance that addresses that?
There's nothing that discusses back of house treatment for businesses. Generally, we would discourage someone installing a full wall or a wall, to along a glass storefront. But what they're trying to do here is make it opaque so that you do not see the
No, I know
wall.
what they're trying to do. There's nothing in the code that addresses affixing things to glass, though, in a commercial area?
Not as it's proposed, no.
I mean...
If it's signage, then yes.
Oh, okay. But since this is not signage, it doesn't address that?
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for the applicant? Since we've already heard public comments on this item, I think we could go ahead and move for a motion. Does anyone want to make a motion on this? Let's have some discussion, shall we?
First, I thought the sign might be too big, but it's just a little bit over the average of if you add them all up. I think what's throwing me is if you look at Keels, which has a bigger size to the K, there's a bunch of little letters in there too, so it's not as sort of predominant visually. This is just block letters that are that big. I guess I prefer it taken down a little bit. I don't know if the rest of the commission's going to agree with me on this. The other thing is putting graphics on fixed glass kind of says we ran out of money and we don't really want to do a real wall there. We're just going to put something on some existing glazing so you can't see in. And I would strongly urge a condition that a more architectural application or construction be done rather than affixing opaque or translucent graphics to glazing. It gives it a real sort of temporary feel.
Commissioner Hudson?
Yeah, I'd just like to continue on with Commissioner Hirschbein's comments regarding the, I'll just call it a decorative panel system. Is it possible to have I'll just call it an applique applied to the back of the glass? Or does it need to be on the front of the glass? Or would you be amenable to substituting the glass with perhaps some of their metal panel or glaze panel that would in fact look more of a permanent statement?
Well, we used to apply to the back of the glass to give it a look, but the problem would be that it would bubble up, especially in the heat and all this, and then it would start to delaminate, and we were always worried that because the back of the side was actually walled for security reasons, we couldn't reach it, which would be, we would be demoing every time we did that. We did not consider a more, to close off that area because we were trying to avoid any impact to the landlord's actual building itself. This building has a very specific design language, and we really did not want to influence it at this point. So we did not consider that at the time.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the applicant, all due respect, already did influence the architecture by replacing a double set of glazed doors with a solid steel door on the left. So we know he's impacted the architecture already. And also, if he's afraid of heat bubbling this thing up, the thing faces west in Palm Springs. It doesn't get much hotter than that. So that'd be a reason for me not to want to put it on the outside, because he's admitting that the product bubbles up in heat. So I would make a motion to accept the signage, but to come back with a more permanent, non-glazed solution to the area below the overhang.
Mr. Chair, if I might just make a comment, I think one of the things that we might investigate is, rather than using a film on the glazing, maybe looking at some type of opaque glazing where that wouldn't be an issue in terms of bubbling up, and it wouldn't impact the architectural design of the building.
Well, I mean, you could still do panels. It could be like Commissioner Hudson said, metal panels can fit in that glazing system channels.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't, it's not really impacting the architecture if you just had metal panels. Again, it shouldn't look like spandrel glass. That's just going to look like we made a mistake and put glass here. I think it needs to look like it was more architecturally intended.
So I'd just like to add that if it were a film applied to the outside of the window, obviously the bubbling would occur there, but I think more importantly, it's accessible to pedestrians and, less than savory people. And I'm just afraid that over the years it would get scratched and just look pretty awful. So I would concur with the idea of substituting the glass panels with something more durable.
So we will work with the applicant to achieve that.
Other comments or questions? Mr. Garner?
I'm just curious if there are other Sephora stores that use this same technique. If you could just answer.
Yes, actually, we just opened a store in Daly City, California that's using it. They are getting the more conventional striping. We took this moment, just like in the Art Commission thing, to put a mural on the front of this store. We're kind of celebrating Palm Springs, so you're getting kind of a more decorative graphic. This is the same graphic that's actually in our Soho store in New York, but you will be the only West Coast store to have that.
But this is the same film type material?
It's the same film type as the external ones, and we have stores going up in Southern California that we're going to be doing this in as well. And it's just, and to answer Commissioner Hudson, the reason that, the reason that we chose to put it on the outside is because we have a dedicated facilities department, and they do upkeep on a monthly, quarterly, annual basis, which means that any bubbling will get fixed immediately. So we do fix it. I understand exactly what you're saying. This is, and that's really the argument for the exterior of the glass versus the interior glass, because we just couldn't reach it.
Any other comments or thoughts? There is, but I think motion has been altered somewhat since we added some more discussion about the bubbling.
No,
so what is the motion then? Who has made the motion?
So the motion is to approve.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought I did.
This is before discussion. I think we're going to start over with that. She just said she wanted to remove it.
So the motion has been withdrawn.
So now we're going to have a new motion.
And we will have a new motion.
Commissioner
Hirschbein. We're all starting over, aren't we? I will make a motion to approve the signage as submitted, but modifying the applied film to the glazing with providing solid panels. It could certainly be with that pattern if they so choose. There's a way to bake on pattern on metal panels, but that they would work with staff to achieve that, a non-glazing option.
Is there a second? Yeah, I was hoping someone would make a second that we can have discussion. Okay, thank you. Can we discuss?
Your microphone, Commissioner.
Okay. In the option, is it possible that if they do do the coating on the inside, so we have the sheen of the glazing outside, that's also an alternative for them to consider? Oh, okay. I'll withdraw my amendment.
Still in discussion then?
Does anyone have any more comments?
Well, I think we threw out the idea of putting the film on the inside of the glass because of the inaccessibility issue, but hearing the applicant talk about their ongoing maintenance, I think we could put a condition that's saying that the film would be okay unless it started to be such an issue with the bubbling that it just wasn't working out.
Commissioner Hirschbein, do you accept that? He does not. So we'll have to then take a vote on the actual motion, and then well, let's do that first. So we'll take a motion. Do I have to read it or? Okay.
No. The motion is to approve the signage as presented with a condition that the applicant modify the glazing at the rear to provide solid panels. That was the condition proposed by Commissioner Hirschbein.
Please vote. It looks like we can have a new motion. I mean, I'm in support of Commissioner Hudson's compromise. So as chair, I guess I can make a motion. I make a motion that we approve Commissioner Hudson's compromise. If we want to restate that.
The compromise is that the film applied to the exterior of the glass is acceptable pending, how can I say this, appropriate maintenance and appropriate appearance. Maybe we condition, I don't know, with the summer months coming up. I don't know, to be honest with you, but how we can word this.
What we would say is something to the effect that the applicant shall be responsible for maintaining the applied coating in a safe and durable state, or something along those lines. We'll refine it, but basically what we're looking is that the applicant is responsible for maintenance, and should they fail to maintain it, then it will either need to be removed, replaced, or come back to the Planning Commission for another treatment.
What the planning director just stated is what I agree
Very
with.
good. Do we have a second? Discussion? Anyone have any additional thoughts before we vote? Seeing none, let's vote. The motion passes. All righty. Now we're going on to public hearings. Item 2A. An amendment to the Palm Springs zoning code to amend the development standards for commercial wind energy conversion systems relative to tower heights and adjustments to setbacks.
This thing's not working.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Before Mr. Malacker begins with the staff report on this item, I'd like to introduce Patrick Tallarico, who's our new sustainability manager. Oh, there he is. Sorry. Patrick just started with the city a couple of months ago, and since he hasn't been here to Planning Commission before, I just wanted to introduce him briefly. We also have Commissioner Friedman from the Sustainability Commission, who is here and will be offering comments under public comment as part of that. But again, I just wanted to introduce Patrick and welcome him here.
Welcome.
Thanks. Happy to see you. I'm sure that you'll be seeing me again.
All right, may we have the staff report?
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. We are waiting for the TV studio to allow us to change slides, so while we wait for that, I'll read the application into the record. So this is an amendment to the Palm Springs zoning code to amend the development standards for commercial wind energy conversion systems, or for WECS for short, relative to tower heights and adjustments to setbacks. This is case 5.1469 ZTA. So the application or the amendment that's before you today is to change section 93.23.07 of the Palm Springs zoning code to facilitate repowering of commercial wind conversion systems, or the wind turbines that you see at the north end of the city. So the revision will achieve two things. It will increase tower heights from a permitted 300 feet to a maximum of 500 feet, and will revise, and then also for meteorological towers, it will increase the height of Met towers from 200 feet to 330 feet. And it will also adjust certain safety setbacks to things such as railroads, transmission lines, property lines, and other buildings that are located off-site. So what I'd like to do is go over some of the goals of the general plan, which is to provide for environmental and sensitive areas that are relative to open space and our conservation element of Chapter 5 of the city's general plan. The specific goals of the general plan and this conservation element is to allow support energy and alternative energy uses such as wind energy, to encourage green technologies, renewable energy, and related activities that are part of the development goals to attract business activity. In addition, the Sustainability Commission has passed a sustainability plan, which is listed in your staff report, that is to help create 500 clean jobs by 2020, train and grow the city's green workforce, supply 50% of all energy from renewable resources by 2030, and be a regional leader in wind energy systems. So the Planning Commission will review the repowering project, and in the past, the city has looked at a recent project called Coachella Flats. And if you remember that project several months ago, it was taking 363 turbines and removing them to be replaced with 30 turbines at a greater height. So to reach these efficiencies, the greater height is needed to replace the lower height towers. So the proposed ordinance will, as I mentioned, which is located on table 3 of your staff report, this table shows what the existing requirement is 300-foot tower will be now a 500-foot tower. The meteorological towers, which are used to determine wind direction and speed, those will be increased in height from 200 feet to 330 feet. So currently, an applicant is required to ask for a variance from the Planning Commission to go over the stated heights. This will no longer be needed with an amendment to the zoning code. In addition, safety setbacks, there are several setback requirements within the code that are relative to safety setbacks, scenic setbacks, and other setbacks relative to property lines and transmission lines. But the revisions to the code will focus on safety setbacks. On your staff report, page 4.5, the table shows the safety setbacks, which currently are 1.25 times the height of the tower. So in this table, it shows if a tower is 500 feet tall, it would need 625 feet from any transmission line, public railroad, off-site building, lot lines, or topography. So maybe we have the The proposed setbacks are to be changed from 1.25 to 1.1. So this would change a required height of 625 feet for a 500-foot tower to 550 feet. And this allows the wind turbines to be closer to these uses that require the greater setbacks, such as transmission lines, lot lines, topography, railroad lines. So the material that's before you today included a draft resolution, and in that draft resolution, the last page of the material that was handed out to you today, one of the sections, section 4, was not included in that draft resolution, so it's being presented to you today. So what this states is that when a tower is over 500 feet tall, that's when they'll need to ask for a variance. This was omitted from the draft resolution that was in your packet, and we want to clarify and present that to the Planning Commission. So this is a public hearing. It is a zone text amendment that requires a public hearing. Notice was published in newspapers that alerting the audience or the residents of this requested change to the zoning code. Today before you, we do have our sustainability manager who's here to testify, and also a representative from the Sustainability Commission who reviewed this, the zone text amendment on February 19th of this year, and they really have been the ones who have been the generating force behind the changes. So with that, I will, the staff does recommend approval, and as I mentioned, those two gentlemen are here to speak to you today.
Are they considered staff, so would this continue to have them speak now? But I was wondering if they're considered staff in this case.
Mr. Chair, I think it would be appropriate that if you wanted to have them give a presentation now, it would be fine to do so.
I'd like that.
No, it's not.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Maruzzi and Commissioners. My name is David Friedman. I'm a member of the Sustainability Commission and its Standing Committee on Solar and Green Building, and I work with your staff and Office of Sustainability staff, Mr. Tallarico, on the draft wind energy conversion system ordinance that's before you this afternoon. The Sustainability Commission approved the draft ordinance at our meeting of February 19th, and I'm here on behalf of our commission to ask you to do the same and recommend approval by City Council. As set out in your staff report, there have been substantial technological advances in wind turbines over the past 30 years. Both the existing wind turbines and the zoning code provisions that regulate their height and setbacks are time-worn and in need of an update. The draft ordinance, as just mentioned, increases the maximum turbine height from 300 to 500 feet and the maximum height of meteorological towers from 200 to 330 feet, which is roughly 100 meters. It also adjusts certain setback requirements. The ordinance is consistent with your approval at the January 23rd meeting of the Coachella Flats project, which removed 363 aging and inefficient wind turbines to be replaced by 20 towers with a maximum height of 499 feet and 2 meteorological towers of 315 feet tall. It is also consistent with the county's turbine standards, turbine height standards. As just Mr. Malacher just mentioned, the draft ordinance does help the city in achieving its planning and sustainability goals as set forth in the general plan, the sustainability plan the council approved in 2016. It facilitates the orderly and efficient development of wind energy resources and regulates their location, operation, and management, supports and encourages the use of alternative energy sources such as wind, and encourages green technology, renewable energy, and related activities as a business development goal and to attract this type of business activity and clean tech jobs to Palm Springs. In addition, as the city works with CVAG for the implementation of the Desert Community Energy Community Choice Aggregation Program, facilitating new wind projects will provide locally produced energy to power a 100% carbon-free electricity option for Palm Springs residents and demonstrate the city's role as a regional leader. I wish to stress that this ordinance does not change the process for your approval of wind energy conversion systems. They will still be subject to all federal and state environmental review standards, in particular CEQA, and you still must grant them a conditional use permit as set out in the slide. You may also impose conditions on the granting of the permit in order to achieve the purpose of the zoning code and the general plan and protect the health, safety, or general welfare of the community. Thank you very much for your consideration, and I am available for any questions you may have.
Is the sustainability engineer going to, or a consultant going to speak? Manager?
For the office, for the city. And I would just confirm what Commissioner Friedman reported and reaffirm that the commission supported this unanimously, and it makes a lot of sense from an environmental perspective due to the efficiencies that are gained by the additional height of the turbines. In addition, I think since the developments will still have to go through a further review process anytime they are proposed, then we were comfortable pushing forward with the proposed changes. So,
thank you. Questions for staff? Yes, Commissioner Donenfeld.
Yes, I have a couple questions. The last time we saw, well, the only time we saw a proposal to increase turbine heights was very recently, and it was alluded to in Mr. Friedman's testimony. We were very concerned about setbacks, and I don't, generally, from a planning perspective, you find that the larger a structure, the longer the setback, the greater the setback. Here we're building 500 feet to the blade towers, and we're shortening the setback requirements for safety reasons, which really doesn't make any sense to me. Can you explain to me why you're shortening the setbacks when you're increasing the height?
So if we look at this slide that's before us, you'll see that this was from the Coachella Flats proposal. And out in the desert area, there are some oddly shaped lots that restrict development. So the safety setbacks are in case there's a failure of the tower. So it falls in an earthquake or the wind or one of the rotors comes off. And which rarely happens because of the technology of the structures themselves. So the proposal is to lessen the setbacks to allow them closer to areas that normally would not in the current ordinance, such as the railroad line and other structures that would be outbuildings that would be on other properties that are nearby.
If I might add to that, again, the setback that's being proposed is still 1.1 times the tower height. And so, as Mr. Malacca has indicated, if there ever were structure failure, generally that's more than safe based on the height of the structure. Another piece of information that is actually new to me, I had never heard this before, but in discussions on making modifications to the ordinance, it was described that if there ever is a blade that comes loose from the structure itself, it's not the condition where the blade will then travel a significant distance, but rather based on the weight of the blade that it most likely will fall straight down to the earth. And so the additional setback that we've had of 1.25 times the tower height actually is more generous than what is needed. And that 1.1 is the more common standard that is now being adopted by communities.
Do we know for a fact that other municipalities considering a 500-foot tower have imposed similar setbacks to the ones you're suggesting and recommending today?
Let's see, I don't know if Mr. Friedman has some data that they've looked at.
I did actually look at this, and the 1.1 does seem to be the standard that seems to be. I looked in particular in California, but also some of the upper Midwest states that are looking at this, Wisconsin, Minnesota, I think, and they seem to be adopting the 1.1. So that does seem to be at least the industry standard. I don't know whether the county has that as well, but that does seem to be now the industry standard for that, just because the way the towers are, technologically possible, the 1.1 seems to be the appropriate standard. I believe in the Coachella Flats one that was reduced to fairly small ones, including I think as low as 64. So this sort of provides a little bit of headroom to not necessarily require a variance in those cases. But the 1.1 does seem to be the industry standard, or more accurately, the standard that governments are adopting, reflecting new industry technology.
Thank you. I assume we're doing this because it provides more flexibility in the way you configure these tower fields as they're built?
That's part of it, but also, we've had a couple of these come in where they've requested additional height, and so they've had to file a variance in order to go through our process. What we're finding that if we approve variances every time for a wind energy tower, that we really need to look at our code and adapt it to current standards. It's difficult to make the findings that the property is unique when we've granted similar findings to a number of other towers. And so again, it just demonstrates that our code is out of date and we need to update it.
My last question has to do with environmental protection. As you recall, in the last case we had with our first towers of this height, there was a CEQA report, obviously, which pointed out certain natural resources being affected by the towers, but we had to work very carefully with the applicant to provide a mechanism whereby there was an ongoing monitoring process, and a check with respect to anything that be happening to species out in the fields. And although I know the CEQA report will point out exactly what those environmental considerations ought to be and how to best mitigate them, I wonder if the ordinance could not, however, provide something that would require that a mitigation plan, similar to the one that we crafted with the last application, be built into any approvals with respect to these towers. I'm not suggesting that there be a specific plan here because each proposal is going to be slightly different, but there was really no requirement that we really make the applicant responsible for an ongoing monitoring situation. And so those were conditions that we attached to the application's approval. And it seems to me if the ordinance would have something that would empower the Planning Commission to require the applicant to come up with some sort of a mitigation plan, maybe mitigation is not the right word, a supervision plan as the project is put into effect, that would help us going forward.
Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the Commission, a lot of that generally gets handled with CEQA analysis anyway, particularly if you're doing a mitigated negative declaration or an EIR, because you're going to have mitigation monitoring requirements in there that will be ongoing with the project. That being said, if the Commission wants to put a condition where it's going to be supervised on an ongoing basis, either by staff or the Planning Commission, we could consider putting something like that in the ordinance. But I think on a project-specific basis, oftentimes the CEQA is going to handle a lot of that for you.
The problem is I don't think in the last case, if I may be wrong, fellow commissioners, but we had to craft some sort of a monitoring process as an overlay to the CEQA findings. And it just seemed to me that if we were empowered to do that by ordinance, that would make our job a little bit easier.
I think the issue was making clear in terms of the mitigation monitoring that was done on an ongoing basis. Keep in mind that each of these will still require a conditional use permit, and you as planning commissioners can attach conditions of approval to the conditional use permit to address any concerns or impacts relative to that. What we might do perhaps, and I'll look to our city attorney, is that in the language of the ordinance itself, we might say something to the effect that based on environmental review, mitigation measures may be required to be implemented. And
that's sort of what I'm looking for.
Okay.
Yeah. So
we can keep it very general there, and then on a project-specific basis, through the CUP, through the CEQA analysis, if you've got a project where CEQA seems to be hitting on all cylinders and everything's covered, maybe there won't be a need for an additional condition of approval there. On the other hand, if there seem to be gaps, the Commission could fill it based on that project specifically.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hudson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to refer to page 3 of 5 of the staff report pertaining to setbacks. It states the current section here. I'd like to refer to item C, sub C. And I'll read it basically because I think the intent is something that needs to be updated certainly. It says no commercial WECs shall be located where the center of the tower is within a distance of 1.25 times the total WEC's height from any lot line. No commercial WEC shall be located where the center of the tower is within 200 feet of any from any lot line of which contains a dwelling. And I think the goal here was to make the setback greater to lot lines which contain a dwelling. So I just would like to make sure that in the discussion and in the updates that number is updated or a different multiplier is used to have a greater setback to a lot, adjacent lot which contains a dwelling.
Dennis, do you want to answer?
If I can address that question, actually, it's not reflected in the resolution, but it is in the ordinance. If you sort of let me go to the right page of the staff report. As is often the case, there are minor inconsistencies between the zoning code and the general plan. The general plan on that specific provision says 500 feet as opposed to 200 feet. So in the ordinance, being the thorough guy who reads the general plan, I noticed that, and I updated that setback to be at least the greater of 500 feet or 1.1. So if you look at page 7 of the ordinance, and whether that's the page, it's also the staff report, but it's labeled 7 on the ordinance. Yeah, so that's page 7 on the ordinance, so it's probably about page 10 or 11 of the staff report. So this is actually in the ordinance the way I drafted it, not reflected in the resolution. Is 3C towards the bottom of that page. No commercial WEX shall be located where the center of the tower is within a distance of 1.1 as discussed of the total WEX height from any lot line. And then it says no commercial WEX shall be located where the center of the tower is within 500 feet from any lot line of a lot which contains a dwelling if this distance is more than 1.1 times the total of WEX height. So I did adjust the ordinance to reflect the general plan, which is actually 500 feet on this one. Actually it would be greater than that because you still have the 1.1. So if the tower is 500 feet as the ordinance would permit, it actually increases the setback to 550. So that's it is addressed in the ordinance. It's not reflected in the resolution, and Mr. Malacher indicated that he can update that as it goes to council. But I did notice that.
Thank you, sir.
Right, and to follow that up, the new resolution that was handed to you today does have that correction on bottom of page 2. Section 3, letter C.
Commissioner Hirschman, did you have a question? I saw you raise your hand first.
Under this formulation, in terms of the setbacks and assuming the maximum size tower, how close does the blade get to the lot line?
These things are pretty vertical, so I'm going to say that it's not going to be very different than these things. I mean, if you look at them, I've been out to
at some point, the blade's going to be horizontal, right?
Yeah, if they're there, I guess they're going to be potentially there. Now, the setbacks, the way I understand it, is that they seem to be based not on where the blade potentially is positioned, but I believe it's where the center of the tower is. Yeah,
I understand how it's written.
Yeah.
My question is, assuming a maximum height tower, how close does the edge of a blade in its most extended position get to the lot line?
Right, Commissioner Hudson, so the wingspan of a turbine is around 300 feet?
No, it's about, the average is usually, for that height, would be about 312 feet.
That's the diameter or the radius?
So that would be, both, that would be,
so 150 feet off of
each, yes.
Right, 150 feet. So, and we were at what was the max?
It'd be 550, so it presumably be about 400. Based on
400 feet from the property. Okay, that was my question. And then I have another one. There was a big discussion when we approved the Coachella Flats project around avian safety. And I was wondering, as a sustainability manager or as the member of the commission, was that addressed? Because we were a little I mean, we're not experts, we're not avian experts, and maybe you're not either, but was that addressed when you were looking at these changes?
No, for the simple reason is because it is, I mean, if you recall from the Coachella Flats, there's, literally like 100 or a couple hundred pages of various MND, CEQA materials. So we were relying on the CEQA process. The challenge is, as we see, and you've probably been reading about this, is that we have various state standards that are requiring renewable energy. They're environmental. We're trying to balance them, knowing that the state has set a goal for renewable energy. We are lucky, blessed here in Palm Springs to have almost the perfect location for that with our wind. So we're really been relying on that. So we didn't specifically address that. Having considered that and read in detail this and some other materials, sort of relying on CEQA, the CEQA process, and any other mitigation that you may require as part of your CUP to deal with that issue on a project-by-project basis.
The sustainability manager didn't look at that either? Is that correct?
No, we didn't really evaluate that aspect of the change. I will say that just in general with these turbines, there's lots of studies that say lots of different things about birds and danger to birds. So we could look into that more if you'd like. But,
no, I mean, we were just looking for some. I was just looking for some guidance because, like you, we heard pluses and minuses when we were sitting up here, and I was wondering if you had reached any sort of definitive conclusion as to the impact on the bird population.
No, we did not look into it.
Thank you. I have, I think I have one more. Oh, this is just a general question, and maybe the sustainability manager can answer it, or the commissioner. How does height influence efficiency?
It's because it's sort of like a blade of a motor on a ship. The bigger the thing, the more efficient it's going to be. The faster the turbine could potentially spin, generating more energy. So that's where it catches more wind. It can spin faster and stronger. Therefore, it's going to turn the turbine faster. That's really the advantage of the height, because it has the additional surface facing the wind. So it gets the turbine to turn faster, spinning around, generating more electricity.
And the faster is because the blade is longer and you're measuring it at the outside?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be faster. It's going to be sort of pushing the turbine, the sort of the force on the turbine is going to be stronger. So that's where they get to be more efficient. Because it's more exposed to the wind. And also, in particular, is the wind is going to vary. The larger surface, because it has more exposure, could potentially pick up a wind that's not of the same speed, a lower speed, because it's just more, it'll pick more of that. So that's one of the efficiency aspects of just the additional surface.
Thanks. I just have one more quick question. And staff, does the planning department do a structural review of these things?
Yes, they all receive
building department. I meant. I'm sorry.
Yes, they receive building permits. They go through the plan check process, and the city is well versed in doing plan checks on these projects.
Structural. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Song, did you raise your hand?
Okay, so the possibility that the blades will be larger in radius than 150 feet. Do you know if the technology is going with, because I think to have the ordinance, and I understand the efficiency, but not to put a limit on the diameter or the radius, then locks us into accept any kind of blade distance. So if we're considering this, I think we should also consider, caveat to this, what is the maximum blade distance that we would be allowing?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, if I may respond to that, the measurement is taken to the top of the blade at the 12 o'clock position, and so that's the ultimate height. So the blades couldn't be any longer than that. Yeah.
Right, so let me point you to the sorry, thank you. So E1 is talks about how the measurement is at the 12 o'clock position. So section 1 on page 2, section 1A. No commercial work shall exceed 500 feet in height measured at the top of the blade at the 12 o'clock position.
So the clarification is that at the tip is 500 feet, and so therefore the top of the tower is 350 feet.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so by being 350 plus 150, that means that the blade will never be wider in technology and because it measures together with the blade tip.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Commissioner Hudson.
Sort of a question then. We're setting a maximum now, but this is an increase about over what the industry used to have. I was wondering if there's any expert in the room here that is the future going to lead to even taller structures and the same argument about more efficiency? Do you know if that's the case?
The answer is yes. The technology is there. The 500 feet is the maximum before you have to get into FAA approval. These things are directly on the flight plan for the airport. I think that 500 feet, there's a reason why Coachella Flats was 499 feet. They wanted to get literally 12 inches under the FAA approval. And, you know, I can't say what the FAA would do, but it just seems very unlikely there. So in other places that aren't necessarily in the flight path, certainly I've been doing a lot of reading about offshore wind, and the technology is definitely there. I think that we're talking about the 500 feet is as big as you're going to see here in Palm Springs because of that FAA, and presumably that's why the county has that standard as well. It just seems unlikely that you would see a request beyond 500 feet because of the FAA standard.
Thank you.
Other questions of staff? I see none. It appears that the applicant already has presented. Is that correct? So we can move on to public comment. So, anyone from the audience? Yeah, there you go. Please, your name and your address.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Joan Taylor. I'm representing the Sierra Club, 1850 Smoke Tree Lane, Palm Springs. And I want to say right off the bat that I'm very impressed by the level of discussion here at this body, and also the level of mitigation and analysis you did on the Coachella Flats. It was very superior to a county review of a similar repower. The county is now being sued over that, but not by Sierra Club. Sierra Club does support repowering, definitely preferable to opening up new areas to wind energy, particularly those that haven't already been industrialized, such as the San Gorgonio Pass. However, at the same time, we are very concerned that these repowers be truly sustainable environmentally as far as the impacts to habitat. We're not too concerned about the habitat on the ground under the MSHCP. The wind energy is allowed because the sand can flow, and that is the main concern in most of the pass area. Some of the repowers do take place on areas that have other habitats that need to be protected. But just thinking about birds and bats, I'm a little confused. I'm hearing that a CUP would be definitely required for these repowers that are 500 feet or less, even though they have a right to go up to that height. I would like to, if I could be directed to where I could see that in writing, that would be very helpful. And I just want to give you a little background on why I'm concerned. Wind energy it depends on the estimates. As your staff says, conflicting estimates are there. 500 to 1 million birds a year. They used to say years ago, who knows now? There are a lot more turbines. And less turbines and taller ones is not necessarily better for all birds than the shorter and numerous ones. They think raptors and certainly migratory birds that are flying higher can get swept up in these things. They look like they're slow, but the turbine tip is going 200 miles an hour or so. In any event, most important, I think, in our request is that there be verification that There would be the full kind of environmental review that the Coachella Flats project was given, and that the wildlife agencies and the public would be notified and given the opportunity to make comment. We consider the wildlife agencies the experts in these matters, and their input we strongly support. And we're glad to see the city likewise, paying attention to it, and that these projects have to avoid, minimize, and mitigate to the full extent required under CEQA. I did see that a CUP would be required for the taller than 500 feet, but not the shorter. Could I just make a couple of other? Okay.
How much more do you have?
Not much. I think these letters, I'll just submit these to the record. They speak for themselves. And in any case, we hope that you continue to try and develop wind sustainably. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Other public comments? All right, seeing none, I close the public comment period. So, do we have any questions of the applicant in this case? All right.
Mr. Mersey, I know we're not generally inclined to have a discussion with a public commentor, but in response to the Sierra Club's concern, I believe it was already stated by staff that all of the normal protections for the environment that are in place with respect to projects like the Coachella Flats project will be in place with respect to all future projects, that this ordinance is in no way circumventing any of those environmental protection requirements, including CEQA and monitoring and whatever else, and the CUP, obviously, that's required.
Right. If you look at your the ordinance, the draft ordinance that is in your staff report on page 3, at the very top, section 932307, it states that it requires a conditional use permit for any submission of a commercial WEX project.
And the CEQA requirement is already in the law.
Correct.
Thank you.
Other questions of staff or discussion amongst ourselves? All right, Commissioner Song.
Glenn and Edward, for being, since you're here and I see this exhibit, I think the question is, number one, where you see the yellow circles are what was proposed on the previous project that was approved. And number two is that the applicant in this case financially it equated for them to build only 20 or so or 30 of them in this situation. So when I see the 3 rows of turbines, the one closer to the property line, there seems to be a sort of a continuous. There's more on the first 2 rows than on the next row over. In a situation, if they were to follow this new ordinance and they had the financial capacity, they could have filled up a lot more on this site.
That is not necessarily so. Part of the reason, so initially when this applicant came to the city, they were proposing 25 turbines as opposed to 20. But in the process of FAA review, they had to reduce the number of turbines because of the height. So that also has something to do with it, not just because of the height, not just because of the sheer size of the proposal, but because as Mr. Freeman mentioned earlier on, FAA does have a different specific set of requirements that they have to meet because of the flight pattern that goes across this area. So they had to reduce the number of turbines. So there is a lot more than just the height or the sheer size of the property that determines the number of turbines because of the height that could be located at any location.
And just because this will help me also understand this ordinance better, the distance in the sort of in the horizontal dimension is much more distance than the distance in sort of the up and down dimension. Do you happen to know why was that was the case?
Okay, so that has to do with the wind access also. So the requirement for setback of wind access, so that plays a major role in it also.
Okay, so the placement, it has to do with the orientation, with the direction of the wind. And
Correct.
So this is most efficient with the natural conditions we have on the site.
And the prevailing winds, that's
Okay.
correct, yes.
Got it, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Hirschbein.
So I'm thinking back to when we approved Coachella Flats. Planning Commission had a few additional conditions, as I recall. Is that correct?
That's correct.
One of them was complying with the wildlife agency's points.
Yeah, so there were 2 recommendations from the wildlife agencies. So the Planning Commission imposed a condition that they have to
comply.
Yeah.
Was there any other conditions that we put on it that you recall?
Well, yeah, if you recall, so there were some mitigation measures that you wanted to modify because they met the requirement for those 2 mitigation measures. So you altered that, and then you also made them responsible for the monitoring process of the project in case of broad accidents within the site.
Right. Any other conditions we put on that you recall?
I think those were the 2 most critical ones.
Okay, so I have a question for staff then. Would it be possible to include those 2 requirements in this zoning ordinance?
So, but one thing I do want to mention is that for the commissioners that have been here for a little longer, this is about the Coachella Flat will be, in the most recent years, will be the 3rd WEX project that will come before you. Sometimes they are different depending on the specific specifications of those WEX. So, for instance, the one that you had before the WKN, before Coachella Flats, was not as tall as these. Those were under 400 feet. Therefore, the specific conditions relative to those WEX were different than the Coachella Flats. So sometimes it will be on a case-by-case basis, so we have to be mindful of that.
I might point out to Mr. Hirschbein that we had this dialogue with Mr. Flynn and Mr. Priest, and we agreed that each project was different so that the ordinance itself had to be more general in terms, but we are going to put in a provision that the Planning Commission can require certain mitigation and other measures to meet the particular needs, environmental needs and protection of that particular site.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Because
but Mike,
any project, putting it in the ordinance would really restrict us in terms of each project will have its own eccentricities.
Correct.
Well,
Hirschbein.
Yeah. Well, I would assume that there'd be similar concerns with a tall wind turbine. I don't know what that exact height number is, but we imposed this bird monitoring condition on, I think they were 400 something feet.
It would have been nice if we'd had a copy of the mitigations for what we
Yeah,
approved
but
last time.
all I'm saying is, and it's okay if Planning Commission can put the conditions on it, but I'm not going to be around here that much longer, and some of us are changing over too. So it's the personnel changes, from a sort of legislative point of view. We required this one applicant to comply with wildlife agency comments or conditions, and I don't see why that would be burdensome, because the conditions are going to change based on the each particular site, and the monitoring of the birds seems like it's just, you'd have that issue at a certain height regardless of a lot of other variables, I would think.
Mr. Vice Chair, if I can respond to that. There's
Yes.
In section 16 of the ordinance, the monitoring section, I'm on page 12 not in the new version, I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of me, but in your staff report that came in your packets. In terms of monitoring, there's already language there in terms of reporting all dead birds found within 500 feet of the WEX. There's some other language there in terms of the mitigation measures, and that ongoing monitoring may be required. So I think in the ordinance itself, there's already some pretty substantial language about those types of things. keep in mind that CEQA changes very little from year to year. So as an environmental review is performed, where there are things such as the multiple species habitat conservation plan and things like that, those will always be included in terms of the mitigation measures. So let CEQA do that. We have language under the monitoring section which addresses those things generally. But keep in mind, as Mr. Robertson has said, that there's going to be slight variations in terms of the unique characteristics of each of the WEX towers, but we have some very generalized language relative to birds, et cetera.
Is there any ability to require consideration of state wildlife agency conditions, or they weren't conditions before, were they? They were suggestions?
They were comments that came back as part of the CEQA review. And so I think what we might be able to do is state something to the effect that mitigation measures and comments relative to the environmental review may be incorporated by the Planning Commission or something along those lines.
I would say specifically referencing state wildlife agency comments, because that's where the comments, if you recall, we adjourned, there was a off.
Yes, what I was going to request is that the Sierra Club representative, whose letter instigated these compromises or mitigations, to comment on this current ordinance, and if there are elements that the Sierra Club finds missing, I'd like to know what they are. I don't know if she was going to say that when 3 minutes ran out, but I'd like to have her come up and respond to that.
I apologize, I have not read the ordinance. I just heard about this, by happenstance. And so I'd be happy to get back to you in writing on that, but would hesitate to suggest something off the cuff without having read it.
I wish I had the document in front of me, what your letter said.
Yeah, I just entered it into the record.
Not this current letter, the letter.
I know.
The previous one?
Yeah, because I didn't have time to write one for this.
Because somewhere in the record, I didn't get anything that shows what the last.
Oh, here it is.
Could I see that? Well, there's something here about, it says require that both temporary and permanent Met towers not use guy wires, or if they do, that flight diverters be installed to reduce impacts to avian species, and prohibit lattice towers.
Those would be fairly common and accepted, requirements, but they're just specific to the Met towers and not to. Well, for instance, Coachella Flat was next to a place that has water in it from time to time. Standing water would draw bats and so forth. So bats would be more of an issue for it. So it's hard to write something that would cover that. I think language that does recommend complying with wildlife agency recommendations, that kind of thing would be good to have so that the developers are on notice.
Thank you. So any other questions before I ask? So, Director Flynn, I would like that your suggestion be included in a motion. So if someone wants to make that motion after we have discussion, I request that would be included.
There were two conditions that were recommended by Commissioners Donnenfeld and Hirschbein. Commissioner Donnenfeld's recommendation was something along the lines that mitigation measures may be implemented and monitored on an ongoing basis to address potential impacts of the WEX towers. And then the second one was that we would have language that comments on the environmental review provided by wildlife agencies may be incorporated as part of the conditions of approval and mitigation measures of the project. So those were the two conditions that were imposed or suggested to be imposed by the Planning Commission members.
Any other discussion before a motion is made? Commissioner Hudson?
I'd like to go back to the setback to property lines, properties which contain residential uses. I'm just not comfortable with the dimension that's being posited. I think we need to have something which makes that dimensional setback greater. We're talking about something, a structure which is basically as tall as a 50-story building. And that's a pretty significant thing to have adjacent to a residential property. I can put it out there as a discussion item, but I
Staff, how do you respond to that?
I know that there are probably very, very few properties where that would happen, but I would like to have some discussion of that.
Are you prepared to discuss that, or is that something that has to?
One of the things that I would ask is if we could also have either our sustainability manager or commissioner, in the language right now, under the existing ordinance, it says no WEC shall be located closer than 1,200 feet from any residence. Would there be any issues if we were to look at that as remaining as a standard?
We didn't propose this. It was just sort of a general reduce 1.25 to 1.1 and fix the inconsistency between the general plan at 500 and the text of the existing ordinance. So this was not something that we have any, and really the whole discussion about the environmental mitigation is not something we focused on. And largely the reason for that is that although I wasn't here at the January 23rd meeting, I relied on the staff report and literally hundreds of pages of the materials, and in particular the conditions of approval that you did. And it struck me as saying, well, we don't need to necessarily change the ordinance, although I clearly understand exactly why you do want to bake that into the ordinance, but the procedure that you used and the conditions that you used on the January 23rd Coachella Flats struck me as being a very appropriate paradigm for resolving and trying to balance the competing interests of more energy, but also understanding the environmental concerns. So I would certainly, as the person who wrote this, I did not propose any change to that standard.
Right. So Commissioner Hudson, so if you look at on the ordinance, page 6, the very bottom, it'll say E, standard and development criteria, number 2, setbacks, B, 1,200 feet from any residence, hotel, hospital. That is not changing.
Okay, thank you. I missed that. I apologize.
Any other discussion before someone makes a motion? Would someone like to make a motion? Then I will. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were pointing to me. Commissioner Donenfeld.
I make a motion that we approve this matter subject to the 2 conditions stated by Director Flynn. That's my motion. And I move the staff report as well.
Any a second?
Maintain it.
Any more discussion? May we have a vote? Motion passes. Thank you. Excellent discussion. All right, let's see here. I think that is the end of our public hearing. I have no unfinished business, so I guess we're moving on to new business.
So,
should I read the introduction? A request by Freehold Communities LLC, Avalon 1150, for a minor amendment to an approved PDD to revise a condition of approval requiring the exclusive use of aluminum framed windows for the Miralon development located at 801 Sunrise Parkway, Zone PDD 290, Section 35. Staff report, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the Planning Commission. So in 2016, the Miralon development came to the Planning Commission to amend the project as it was previously approved in 2004. And during that amendment, series of conditions were proposed by the Planning Commission. One of those conditions was PC 19, and PC 19 required that window frame material shall be restricted to aluminum frames only at the Miralon development. So, but following that approval and following the submittal of final development plans for the project, we've had numerous requests and from the applicants and from the ownership of Miralon development of the issues they were being faced by that condition. As a result, we received a request from the ownership of Miralon asking the Planning Commission to amend that conditions to allow them to use vinyl frames as opposed to aluminum frames only. So this is a final development approval that the Planning Commission is allowed to make minor amendments to, as long as that amendment does not affect the original intent of the PD. Staff believes that this request does not affect the original intent of the Miralon Development Plan Development District, in that they are not asking for any reduction of lot sizes or other development standards. It's just to review the possibility of revising that condition of approval, which is PC 19. In the staff report and the other exhibits provided to you, the reasons for the applicant asking for that condition to be revised are provided to you, but also they had samples of different developments within the city that are not required to use aluminum frames. They have used vinyl frame windows, and the applicant feels that the Planning Commission should, on that basis, reconsider that condition of approval. Also, in the staff report, there are two types of resolutions there in that staff is making two recommendations. Number one, you may decide to remove that condition and allow development in the Miralon to use other types of materials, or you may choose, or as an alternative, choose to have that condition remain as it is. During the course of the week, there were questions received from members of the Planning Commission for additional analysis or information regarding the use of vinyl frame. The applicant is here to make additional presentation to you in addition to the analysis contained in your staff report. So that will conclude my staff report, but as I mentioned, the applicants are here to make additional presentations to you and to answer additional questions that you may have relative to that condition PC 19. Thank you, sir.
Questions for staff? Commissioner Garner?
I have a question. Does anyone know why they required aluminum frames back in 2004? Do we have their reasoning at all? I mean,
well, actually, that condition was not recommended in 2004. It was in 2016.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was 2016.
During the amendment to the project. And as we mentioned in the staff report, we believe that it was only for aesthetic considerations, in that there isn't any requirement in the code or in the development, in the design guidelines for the Miralon as a whole that has that requirement.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we have the applicant speak? All right, would the applicant come forward, please?
Hi there, Brad Schuckart with Freehold Communities on behalf of the Miralon development. I won't take too much of your time. To address the question that Edward just discussed, yes, it's my recollection, and I would think this body would agree, that this was largely an aesthetic decision that was made back in 2016. And it's understandable in as much as these are modern homes. We're going for an authentic aesthetic. But I think it's important to point out that there are also other similar modern developments that are currently using vinyl windows. And one of the biggest concerns that we've got is, I think, summarized in this table here. If you're comparing non-metal windows to metal windows, first and foremost, you know, the metal windows do provide a modern aesthetic, undoubtedly. But there are similar products, or there are vinyl products that offer similar aesthetics. And we've actually got some samples here we'll circulate as we conclude this discussion. The bigger concern, however, is energy efficiency. So Miralawn prides itself on being an energy efficient master plan community. I mean, if you look at our clubhouse, it's designed to be 15% better than Title 24 requirements. We've got rooftop solar on every residential unit that'll be developed. We specifically designed the landscape palette to be water conscious and water conservative as compared to the original golf course, which is how we ended up with groves of olives. And quite frankly, using aluminum framed windows kind of flies in the face of that. They are inherently less energy efficient. In fact, we supplied a Title 24 study, or at least a memo from a Title 24 expert that analyzed the same house, with the only change being going from vinyl windows to aluminum windows. And that home, which was one of the ones that this body has approved for Miralawn, dropped in energy efficiency by roughly 28%. Now you can get low E aluminum windows that improve upon that, but they're still never going to get to vinyl. They're still about a 9% inefficiency. And you know, the other point to make here is something that's net new to us. One of our builders, Woodbridge Pacific, actually just has their plans nearly finalized through the city. You've approved their architecture, and the actual design drawings are very near completion. And so they're at the point where they're starting to bid out this work to start the construction process. And they have a window broker that they work with, who actually has a representative here who can talk about some of the technical details. But they chose an aluminum framed window to install in these homes. Again, this is architecture that you've blessed, this body has blessed, the AAC has blessed, and worked very hard in order to do so. These are large window openings, large sliders. The location that Miralawn sits is, we all know, a very windy environment. And it just so happens that aluminum frame windows, and doors, because they need to be as efficient as possible, they need to be thermally broken. And in inserting that thermal breaking, and again, this is where my expertise falters because I really don't know what that means other than I'm regurgitating language here. It actually weakens the integrity of the aluminum frame. As opposed to vinyl, where that's not true. You can actually get a completely extruded product, and it has all the thermal protections necessary. And the manufacturer that they went to actually said they will not supply metal frame windows for the house as designed. So it's not only limited availability, it may be no availability based on the architecture that's been approved for these homes, in many instances, given the location of the property. The other is fairly self-explanatory. Not only is this a larger burden on the builder, but it's a larger burden on the ultimate homeowner. So energy costs go up. That means higher bills. That means, just a greater burden overall. And then the last piece here is this cost-effective solution versus an expensive solution. Now, I know that it may not be the biggest concern of this body about how much these facilities cost the builders, but we have designed Miralawn specifically to be a high-quality master plan that's energy conscious and also relatively affordable as compared to other developments in town, especially further south in town. And if you look at the cost of these systems, I mean, they are a factor of 2 or 3, and it's very difficult to then build an affordable home and install these windows when, quite frankly, you're not getting your bang for your buck there. I mean, if a builder wants to install $20,000 worth of extras, that's probably better put towards upgraded pools, upgraded cabinetry, things that people enjoy on a daily basis, not just something that they take for granted. So, for all those reasons, we're asking that this condition be waived, and I'm happy to bring up these samples. I'll note that this is just it's not an actual window, but this is a laminated product. I know there was a concern about durability and paintability. Some windows are painted. In fact, we have some samples that are painted. But this is a material that's actually sort of baked on, and it would hold up well given the climatic conditions here. And there are also extruded varieties of vinyl windows where the color is actually in the plastic itself. So I'll swing those around, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, please pass the samples around. And then do we have questions of the applicant Yes, Commissioner Garner.
Do we have a sample of the aluminum window as well? I mean, so I did a quick Google search and I can't tell the difference. So I'm just curious as to if there is a discernible difference visually. Maybe someone else here can answer that.
To be perfectly frank, if you're asking for my opinion, I can't tell the difference either. I literally had to go up to, because we were doing a survey around town of who's using metal versus vinyl, and I had to physically go up and tap on the window frames before I could tell whether it was metal or vinyl. So, as you can see, especially the silver one, which is the window system that's being used currently at Sky, that literally is the window from a $1.5 million, $2 million house. Those were intended to look like metal, and certainly from afar they do.
Other questions of the applicant? Commissioner Song?
Is your energy consultant here?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, the energy consultant, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
While she's coming down, I just have a quick question. Do the aluminum, when the Planning Commission put the requirement of aluminum windows, was there a width of the frame that was included? Because are aluminum windows thinner around the edges?
They can be. And maybe that was the intent. I mean, certainly that's not in the language of the condition.
I'll have to ask my fellow commissioners who were on, several of you were on the commission at that time. Does anyone recall why the windows were requested to be aluminum? Apparently they're not listening.
Absent comment from the other commissioners, if you recall the design guidelines, it references 3 very specific architects as a model for the architecture at Miralon. And as you look at those structures, aluminum windows are what were typically used. Cody, Easter Williams are 2 of the examples, and aluminum windows were what they typically used in the day. And so I think it was an intent to be true to the design aesthetic of those architects. I believe that was the primary concern and interest.
Do we have an energy expert to speak here? And/or answer questions?
So on your page 2 of your report, executive summary analysis, and then you have a table of windows and door types. So the standard that you're using with the vinyl window, you're using a U value of 0.32 and a shading coefficient of 0.25.
That's right.
Okay, and then when you're comparing it to the other type of window frame, for example, the Milgard aluminum, your U value that you're using is 0.68 and a shading coefficient of 0.52. So those are not equal values. And so could you explain why you were not using equal properties when you were looking at different frames?
Yes, because aluminum windows aren't capable of achieving the same thermal performance as vinyl, as non-metal. Yeah. So to look at the table, you have it in front of you?
Yep.
The first line is the standard reference house. That's the prescriptive Title 24 standard that the California Energy Commission sets.
Correct.
We have to do a side-by-side analysis of our house and that house. And if we use less energy than the prescriptive house, we meet the energy code.
Correct.
So ours actually had 0.31 U factor. That's the conductivity. That's the rate of heat transfer into the house in the middle of summer. You can see it's very close to the prescriptive standard with the vinyl product. And the solar heat gain coefficient we chose was 0.29. That's a product that Gallery Homes, one of the builders on this project, commonly uses in the Coachella Valley. So we modeled that, we got it to comply, meet the energy code, and the energy use is shown in that table. Estimated utility costs were roughly $1,360 there. But when we put in a builder aluminum product, you can see the conductivity goes up to 0.68, double the prescriptive standard. Solar heat gain coefficient's also higher, and that's where we got the 28% higher energy use for the house.
So you're saying that Milgard Aluminum Manufacturing does not have a window with window frame and thermal break of the values that are the same as your non-metal?
This is a non-thermally broken product that I modeled there.
Okay. So this is a non-thermally broken product.
That's right.
But there are thermally broken products that are equal in value.
They don't quite meet prescriptive standards, but they do perform better on conductivity. Roughly 0.4 range, 0.5, the thermal break product. 0.4.
And you have experienced that, maybe it should be the, okay, you have experienced that, you know that these values are based on your glazing. They're not based on the frame itself.
It's not entirely accurate. It's the whole window unit, the combination.
Okay, so you have evaluated the fact of how vinyl will perform in the desert.
That's right.
You have data on that, and therefore you would say that the vinyl performs just as well as aluminum over the 25-year span on west facing.
Well, in terms of energy, I would say no. The aluminum underperforms non-metal frames. Outside of that, you'd have to ask the builders with more experience.
Okay, so you're strictly looking at the energy performance, not at the performance over time after the first cost cycle. Okay, all right, thank you.
Other questions of applicant or staff?
Yeah, could I ask the question on the, you said you have a window representative here? Hi, was there any consideration for fiberglass window rather than
Originally they were spec'd to be aluminum, so we provided all of the information as far as DP ratings, U factors, and solar heat gain ratings for the aluminum, and then vinyl being the alternative. Fiberglass has not been requested at this point.
Okay, and I'm sorry, what company are you?
I work for Next Level Door and Millwork. We're a door and window finished carpentry business.
Okay, and what is the product that is being considered here for?
I have Geldwin, Milgard, and MI vinyl.
Okay.
And Milgard aluminum as well.
Okay, so on those products, you have a history of 25 years of these vinyl windows performing here in the desert.
I would believe so. I've only been doing the windows for about 5 years, but there's definitely vinyl out here that's been out here for much longer. 20, 25 range easily, I would say.
Right, and what has been the performance? No callbacks, no repairs?
No, I haven't had any issues along with the lines of any structural issues, anything that's coming with Title 24.
Issues?
No operational issues.
And they're relative to the sizes that are being designed in this project?
Yes, I've actually quoted these projects already for Woodbridge Pacific specifically.
But your experience is based on the last 3 years?
My experience is based on, I've done the family developments and Dakotas. I'm actually installing some vinyl here locally in Palm Springs today.
But those are less than 5-year-old projects?
Yes, and I've done some that include down in Dakota, which is over 5 years, which is in.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All righty, I think we are finished with the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have some discussion. Oh, here we go. Commissioner
The
Hirschbein.
examples you gave us, are they different manufacturers?
Yes, they
are.
The
profiles are very different.
Yes, they are. We were looking for either product that's currently being installed or something we thought would be representative. And then this, what I did not hand you, and I'm happy to circulate this as well.
And the one that's the bronze color, is it just off the cuff here, top of my head thinking, that's a nicer profile than the one that's aluminum colored. It's slimmer, it's more elegant. Is there a way to specify that one versus the other one?
Certainly, I think you could condition it, and ultimately keeping in mind that, you know, this body and the AAC have oversight over the approval of the architecture.
Well, we don't usually get into window manufacturers or details, so I'm just throwing that out there, that you got two and one's a lot nicer than the other one.
Yeah, I might offer that here are the Sky, so that the silver windows here, I don't know if this body was involved in approving Sky, but those are literally the windows that are being installed at Sky currently or were recently installed.
That looks real different.
Yeah, it may be
No,
light.
the manufacturer might be the same, but the profile is very different.
Sky is this one on the...
Yes. Icon, here's Sol was just mentioned, but this Geldwin Premium Vinyl Series, that's the one on the right there. And then this Windor is a local manufacturer? A national manufacturer, and that's the window on the left. So, you know, I would suggest that maybe this body recommends, if this is the preferred option, a Windor or comparable.
Could I ask a follow-up question to that?
Yes, go ahead.
So the frame on inside is white. Do you propose that they're going to be factory painted aluminum anodized match, or just keep them as white?
You know, honestly, as master developers, we don't get into that level of detail. So I can defer to Rick Hauser from Gallery Homes if he's got an opinion as to how he's going to treat it.
Hello again. Just a couple comments. We could go either way. We would probably prefer the colored on the outside because they do not do the color on both sides. So whether we went with the bronze or the silver, you would have the white on the interior. One thing also I want to point out.
Sorry, could I pause you on that a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, so the question asked is that if you're going with a clear anodized aluminum look, right? You're going to match that with your vinyl.
Okay.
You're going to factory paint it so that it matches to a clear anodized look from the outside. On the inside frame, the sash on the inside frame, would you have that to be white, as you're showing us in the example?
Yes.
Or will that also match the clear anodized on the outside? Because you sort of are saying to the homeowner, hey, this is still the aluminum look, but a different product.
I'm not sure that you can do the color both outside and on the inside. I'm going to refer to the window manufacturer because we're not currently doing that on any of our desert homes. We're using a tan, which is through the whole, you know, inside and out because it's an extruded product. But I'm going to let Bailey answer that, but I do have a couple other follow-ups I would like to share with you on the window vinyl versus the metal from a builder's perspective also.
As far as the vinyl, if you have silver, bronze, black, whatever color they decide to choose on the exterior, the white needs to remain on the inside. You cannot paint the inside. Main reason being is that in order for the window to maintain being heat resistant, you have to let it breathe through. So if you paint the inside, when the window starts absorbing and starts to reflect the heat, that's actually not going to let it help reflect it. It's actually going to start absorbing it to expand the window and damage it. So in the long run, you can't paint the inside of that window. It has to maintain being white.
So your factory options are white inside only?
White inside only, and then you get to choose the exterior color of your choice.
Tan front and back, inside
You
and
can
out.
do tan inside and out, or you can do a white inside and out. But as far as doing anything that's bronze or silver to make it appear more like aluminum, it has to be white on the inside. They don't have the ability to extrude vinyl with silver inside and out.
Or bronze.
Or bronze. It has to have a laminate on the outside or a super cap for those specific colors.
Any other questions by the architects?
I think you want. You wanted to make your comment?
Well, I just wanted to make a comment from a builder standpoint because I just wanted to explain, if you've followed the Title 24 requirements and you look at the metal frames that are, and there's really only one person or one manufacturer that you can even get these windows, and you can see there is a problem with they're not used anywhere in the country. So the one manufacturer that does, Milgard, They only deliver at certain times. You heard that Woodbridge is going through a problem with being able to have them actually warrant the product because the windows are like they were way back when. They're not a good energy efficient window. In my instance, in my homes that are even bigger, let's just take the Woodbridge house, which is the smaller home. The cost for that smaller vinyl window, and when they go through that energy calculation, if you guys understand how Title 24 works, they run it against the standard model that they were explaining.
Can you hold on 1 second? Do we need to hear any more of this? I think we need to move on.
I just wanted to show, though, I think the cost to the end user, I think, is going to play a huge part on a decision.
That point was made already.
We got the picture on that.
And you know the numbers.
That point was made.
But they were in the report.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. All right, discussion amongst ourselves. Commissioner Song.
Okay, so the PDD application came with the fact that it presented 3 architecture styles, and those architecture styles, obviously from the 1950s, 60s, if you look at what's available as far as window product, yes, steel was available, aluminum was available. Today, in 2019, vinyl is available, but also fiberglass is available. If you look at it from the builder's point of view, of course, they need to make a profit. They need to make this project work. And you have invested quite a bit in just on the design and the engineering itself. However, the idea that, yes, Title 24 is very important, but Title 24 is incident to the building at the point where permit is being pulled. There is, on the projects that we do, affordable housing, those projects have to stay affordable for 50 years. So the product that we build have to be durable. And we build with fiberglass because they are much better performing window than aluminum and vinyl. Sort of anecdotally, in the desert, vinyl has not performed well, but I don't have any data, nor I have scientific proof of that. But in the practice, it has been heard of that. The issue here for me is what is the product that the homeowner is going to end up with. So I understand as far as calculation-wise, because I'm in this business too, yes, the vinyl window will perform. The issue is, would it last 25, 30, 40 years when the residents are, when the developer has moved on and the resident is the one that needs to fix these things. I understand from a cost perspective that this is a viable option, but my approach is it's not about the energy, it's more about the cost. And if presented that way, I think I could understand it and I could be behind this.
Other thoughts or comments? Commissioner Hudson?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this, and you know, I was there. Truly, this condition was based on aesthetics, and reviewing the other projects that have been approved, including Sky and the others, they did not have that condition. So I'm always one about consistency and fairness, and I think aesthetically, the vinyl windows, they're not my cup of tea, but I can understand all the other arguments being made. So basically, I'm okay with the vinyl windows. I think fiberglass, that's actually an option that I hadn't thought about. But again, unless the city were to codify these issues, I just don't feel comfortable placing a special onus on this project.
Commissioner Donenfeld?
I sort of agree with Commissioner Hudson. The wonderful thing about this project is I think this is going to be a beautiful place to live in some lovely homes at an affordable price. I think your price point is really very much needed in Palm Springs. So although aesthetically, I have a mid-century house and it's got the metal frames and I love them, I think we're living in 2019 and we're trying to build properties to the best of our ability that people are going to like and enjoy and communities that they're going to enjoy living in. And the cost is an issue here, so I would go along with the vinyl framing as well.
Other comments? Commissioner Garner.
So the cost is also my issue because we do need more affordable housing. Obviously, they're not affordable in the same way that some of the other developments we just approved are, but still something that's more affordable. But I do like what Commissioner Song was saying about the fiberglass, because if affordability is not just the cost up front, it's also the replacement cost down the line. And so if we want homes to be affordable, we want them to be affordable up front and later. So I'm interested in hearing more about fiberglass, but if that's not something that we can do, then I understand. I'd rather just go with a more affordable option.
Anyone else before I speak?
Can we get a reaction from the developer or the builder on fiberglass?
Good idea.
So fiberglass and vinyl actually are fairly similar when it comes to doing their Title 24s. They're both gonna pass. They're not gonna have difficulties with that. They do both withstand very well, especially out here with our heat. That's a big concern for a lot of our windows. You can get pretty much the same things in either or when it comes to your colors, and they will withhold out here in the weather. They will be able to withstand also the wind speeds of up to 125 in that specific area as well. So they will perform either way. As far as price range, the fiberglass is going to be a little bit more expensive, but that's mainly just because of the process that it's being built with. So it's just going to honestly depend on what's going to be best for cost-wise when it comes to that, because they're going to both perform best for Title 24, DP ratings, solar heat gains, U factors, all of that. So what could be as a suggestion is you could see about having them do a price point of seeing what the difference is between vinyl and fiberglass for these options and seeing about implementing something like that.
Are there aesthetic differences in terms of the profile?
They will be different. It just depends on that manufacturer. So like with the vinyl, they may have, let's say, a 1-inch frame from one manufacturer, and then they could have a fiberglass completely different series that they make in a different way, and that one could have a 2-inch frame. So it just depends on how that manufacturer decides to make them. Usually they're fairly similar. They're not as drastic as going from some of the other, going from aluminum to a full vinyl, which usually is a little bit different.
But fiberglass would be a thicker, a wider profile.
Not necessarily. It can be fairly similar to the vinyl. Usually they're not very drastic. They're very similar, but maybe within the inch. They're not going to be anything. Yes.
Mr. Hirschbein.
In your experience, what drives the choice between those two types of windows?
I very rarely see anybody ask for fiberglass. If anything, nowadays they want aluminum, vinyl, or a wood clad.
And when you do see people ask for fiberglass, do they explain the rationale behind that?
A lot of the times they just hear that they perform well and they're good for their home. They're going to be energy efficient. But I haven't seen any statistical data that shows that they outperform vinyl. I've seen stuff that has shown that they've done fairly similar, but that was about 2 years ago when I was doing my research.
I know, I was just wondering what, excuse me, just want to talk to her.
Oh, I was just going to tell you about the fiberglass.
I was just wondering, in terms of your customers, what they've expressed as a preference, why they've expressed a preference for fiberglass.
Usually when I see homeowners, they're coming in and if they're asking for fiberglass, it's because someone's recommended it to them. A lot of the times when I see homeowners coming in and asking for it, they don't really know the product, so they come in and they try to figure out what is best going to be for their house, and it usually depends on the location of their area.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, if you want to.
I'm sorry, I forgot who you are.
I'm sorry, Rick Hauser, Gallery Homes.
Okay.
We're one of the builders. We use, if we're in a high moisture area, we'll lean towards fiberglass. The vinyl has kind of a mold, can get a little bit of a mildew type issue once in a while and maybe discolor a little bit. But in the desert, we've never had a request or have ever used the fiberglass.
Okay, thanks.
The question I'd have though on the fiberglass is though, The big deal here is going to be windows versus sliders. We got to also remember we have large sliders, 8-foot, 10-foot high, 12-foot wide sliders. And we got to make sure that whatever product that's being recommended, vinyl or the fiberglass.
Your window person's there, she can answer.
That's why I just want to make sure that you ask that question, because we're talking about the color on the outside versus the color on the inside. And we're also talking about, will the slider match? Because some of the products here might not be able to span the 12 and 10-foot heights. That's another thing I just want to make sure it's brought. You guys have that discussion.
Do you want to hear from the window expert or not? Okay, apparently not. Any other discussion? I'm just curious what staff has to say about all this.
As we've indicated in our staff report, again, this is an aesthetic decision. There is no code requirement that comes into play here. You are looking at your architectural review criteria, the guidelines that have been adopted, and you've required something that is consistent with those guidelines. In this discussion today relative to should you allow vinyl or not, again, it's based on the information that you see here. Will we still be able to achieve the same aesthetic end result using the vinyl as the aluminum? And you've had testimony and you have an example that shows that you can come fairly similar in terms of the exterior. What you might do if I've heard a couple of you say that you're amenable to allowing some variation from the aluminum. What I might suggest to you is that in terms of the condition, you might say that aluminum is the preferred choice. However, the Planning Commission may approve alternate materials on a case-by-case basis. With the approvals that you have in place, you have two developments that have already been approved. You have Woodbridge Pacific, and then you have Gallery Homes. If they want to come back in, let's say the next Planning Commission meeting, and propose an alternate window, you could consider those on a case-by-case basis, and what you might have them do is bring a sample, as they've done here today, and that you approve a specific window manufacturer and color. So that's what I might recommend, again, just based on what I've heard you say so far.
Commissioner Donenfeld has a motion you'd like to make.
I was going to move the staff report.
Is there a second? Okay, let's have some discussion.
I'm sorry, Mr. Vice Chair, if I could just have clarification. The staff report is giving you two alternatives.
The answer is yes.
And if you could select one of those alternatives, that would help us.
Let me back up for one moment, please.
I'm proposing that we approve number one, the vinyl.
So you accept that as a second? Well, let's have discussion. Turn your microphone on.
I propose that instead of saying vinyl, because then it limits us to a product, that we actually say what it was recommended by, that is that the aluminum is highly recommended, and that the other products per case basis can be brought up for our approval.
My only question is, we've got this particular set of homes to be built now. So are we saying that your change to my motion would permit the builder to build with vinyl now, but each time we get a new proposal from another merchant builder or these builders, we look at it again?
Yeah.
Again?
Well, so if they want to change now, they can change without coming back to us?
Yes.
Yes. And that's my motion.
Yeah.
And Maria, I don't have a problem with your suggested change.
Okay.
Do you, Mr. Hudson?
All right, any additional discussion? Let's call the motion. It passed unanimously. Thank you very much, experts one and all. All right, we have other business. A discussion, this is 5, yes. Oh, you know what? It's time for a bathroom break. Why don't everyone come back at 3:45? Thank you. I call the Planning Commission back to order. So back to other business, item 5A, discussion of entitlement process and zoning regulations relating to recreational vehicle hotel concept. Staff report, please.
Mr. Chair and members of the Commission, this is just a discussion item for you this afternoon. There will be no vote taken on this. What I wanted to do is bring before you this concept of a recreational vehicle hotel. I'd say in the 4 years that I've been here, I've probably met with about 10 to 12 people, usually around Coachella, where they come into my office and they ask about being able to do an Airstream hotel. And so, you know, for the most part, I've given them direction from the zoning code and never heard from them again. But I do have a couple of individuals who are more serious in terms of their proposal and have done research in terms of building code requirements and other things. And so what I thought it would be appropriate is to present this to you, lay out the entitlement issues that we have in terms of how do we bring this through a process, and then secondarily, how does it then go through a permit process, just so you have some background and maybe can give some direction in terms of what we might be looking for as these might come forward through a major architectural review process. So with that, let me go ahead and get started. In terms of the concept itself, what it is proposing is to use RVs, such as an Airstream trailer, to serve as hotel rooms. Unlike an RV park, instead of the RVs coming and going, in this instance, the RVs actually stay on the site permanently. They are owned, the site is owned, and the RVs themselves are owned by one person, and then they would be operated by a hotel, so that similar to a hotel, you would make reservations, you'd stay for a couple of nights, and then move on. The RVs themselves would be permanently connected to utilities, so in terms of electricity, water, sewer, that would remain there. And again, they would provide amenities such as maid service or other similar hotel amenities. And so again, from a functional standpoint, it operates just like a hotel. The thing is, it looks different than a hotel. Actually, it's a broader category than that. What is being proposed is to actually use trailers. So it would typically be the Airstream trailer, as you may have seen in the examples that I put together for you previously. In terms of where this is being done, I just look primarily in California for examples that would be comparable. There is a chain called AutoCamp, who actually has 3. There's a third one, I believe, in Yosemite, but they have one in Guerneville on the Russian River, and then a second one in Santa Barbara. There's a place called Caravan Outpost in Ojai, and then up in the high desert, there's a place called Hicksville in Joshua Tree, and then Kate Pearson of the B-52s has Kate's Lazy Desert, which is out in Landers. So there's a couple of examples that are there existing where they have gone through and been approved for that type of use. Relative to our zoning code, it becomes a question of how do we fit this in to our existing regulations and processes. And as I describe in my memo to you, there's a couple of different ways that we could look at this. The easiest way, from my opinion, is to treat it as a hotel and then be subject to the same development standards as any other hotel. So what that means is that the underlying zoning district, anything from commercial to our multifamily zones where hotel is a permitted use, it would be subject to those development standards in terms of setbacks from property lines, separation between buildings, height limits, etc. And so I see that as probably being the most reasonable process that it would fit into. Mr. Hirschbein.
Are those considered buildings?
That becomes the second question. Technically, they wouldn't be considered buildings. They would be treated as recreational vehicles, and that is regulated by the state. And I'll get to that, how that creates kind of an issue for us in just a moment. The second way that we could look at this is under the section of the code that's entitled Recreation Vehicle Park. However, in doing that, there's some standards within that section of the zoning code that would present problems. Number one, a recreation vehicle park requires a minimum acreage of 20 acres. And the proposals that have come into me are looking at sites that are much, much smaller than that. They're a standard city site that is much less than 20 acres. In addition, there are also setback requirements that are much more onerous than our standard underlying zoning district requirements. And then there's other things in terms of minimum paved area per RV site and so forth that would just be impossible to conform to as these things are being proposed. And so if the applicant were to proceed down that route, they would have to file variance applications in order to do that. And I don't know that we'd be able to make the findings. So I don't see that we could process these as a recreation vehicle park. The third option is under a planned development district applications. With our newly adopted ordinance, that also presents a number of problems in that we cannot waive standards as we have been able to in the past. Also, we have the issue of public benefit. And I don't know what we would do as a public benefit for an Airstream trailer park. I just don't know how that would work. And so I think processing it as a planned development also poses some challenges that really make it not the best way to proceed. And so for that reason, looking at my analysis of the zoning code, I would recommend that we consider these to be hotels and then process them under the development standards that we have with the associated zoning district. The next issue that Commissioner Hirschbein brought up is how do we issue permits for these types of things? I've met with our building and safety department and our fire department in terms of how they would bring these in. Building and safety would have an issue unless we classify this as an RV park or the trailers themselves as RVs. Again, the state has the jurisdiction and the permitting for these as RVs, and so it would be unlikely that the building and safety department would actually issue permits for the trailer itself. Any accessory structures on the site, for example, if they had an amenity building, perimeter walls, et cetera, swimming pool, they would issue permits for that, but they would not issue permits for the RV itself.
Plumbing.
Yes, they would have to do that, but not the actual trailer itself. The fire department has some life safety concerns, and their initial approach to this would be to require sprinklers, that the trailers would need to be retrofitted with sprinklers in order to comply with life safety requirements. How that would occur is essentially what they'd need to do is bring some external water line up outside of the trailer and then punch through the roof with the actual sprinkler apparatus. So aesthetically, that's not the best way to go about it, but that's something that they might need to do. Now, our fire marshal did say if there is any information that can be provided from other jurisdictions in terms of how they've addressed life safety concerns, he would certainly look at that. But his initial approach was that it would require some type of sprinkler in the trailers themselves. So those are a couple of the permitting issues that we still have to resolve and work through with building and safety and fire. In terms of aesthetic issues, this is something that you as the Planning Commission could deal with as you consider a major architectural application. If we do this as a hotel, it would still require a major architectural application because you are installing structures on a site. So that would be the approval process that we would go through. And so we would use our architectural review criteria in evaluating the application. And so some of the things I think that we would need to look at is that there needs to be some type of a perimeter wall. For example, looking at the context, would a neighbor want to see these shiny Airstream trailers across the street from them? Probably not. And so we'd want to have some type of a perimeter wall, however, it's limited to 6 feet in height. So it would need some type of landscaping to go with that. In one of the examples that I showed to you in the packet, the Caravan Outpost, they have some rather dense landscaping there on the site that not only is it difficult to see from the perimeter, the interior perimeter, but also between the trailers themselves, they have rather dense landscaping, which I think is helpful. So landscaping is going to be an important component of these. In one of the examples, the auto camp from Russian River or Guerneville, Their amenity building is just absolutely beautiful. And so there is a degree of architecture that can be applied to these, and we can look at it as an important component to have as part of the overall complex. So again, I think there's going to be some aesthetic questions that you as the Planning Commission would want input on as part of this major architectural review process, and something that we would look at on a case-by-case basis, in particular looking at the context of the site and what it relates to across the street and adjacent to it. So those are some of the issues. Again, this is just a discussion item. My recommendation would be that we process these as a hotel. We still have some additional work to do with building and safety and fire on that regard. I did reach out to other planning directors, particularly in Ojai and Santa Barbara. Haven't received a response from Santa Barbara, but I did get an email back from the planning director in Ojai. He was not there in place when Caravan Outpost was approved in 2013, but he indicated that they had approved it as a hotel facility. However, on the permitting side from the Building and Safety Department, they did look at it as an RV park. So they kind of had to bifurcate their approval of that project. He indicates that it was not a simple process, but they eventually were able to permit that particular development. So again, just looking for your input on that, and with that, I'll go ahead and take your questions.
Commissioner Donenfeld?
Flynn, my first question is, do we really need this in Palm Springs? I honestly look at this, and I'm not being a snob and an elitist, but I like to think of our town as an international tourist resort. It's not Ojai. And this is, I think there's so many problems attached to this. Transients in motels, safety issues, site issues, aesthetic issues. How do you control the types of trailers? What do they look like? Land is not that easily available here in Palm Springs anymore, and I would think they would be looking for larger, more remote areas where the land is not as expensive to place these. I just wonder if the whole concept is appropriate for Palm Springs.
In response to that question,
has the council given you some interest?
No, they have not reviewed this issue yet. I would say that in terms of our code, could we allow someone to file an application? I would say absolutely. But it's a discretionary application, and that you all as the Planning Commission would be reviewing a major architectural application. And as part of that, again, looking at our criteria under the major architectural application, you have to make findings that it is harmonious and compatible. And as you're suggesting there, you may have difficulty in making that finding. So someone could apply, but does it have to be approved? The answer is no. If you don't make the findings, then as a discretionary approval, may not happen.
Mr. Hirschbein.
Yeah, I think I've been out of sync with the rest of the commission much of the day today, but I think it's a great idea. In the appropriate location. I think it's fun. I think it's hip. I think it's the kind of demographic that a lot of the hotels are going after in a different way. I could see this, a development like the site plan you gave us, in substituting where we recently approved a hotel on Indian next to the tire store. I think that would have been a great site for this. I think it's fun. I think it just adds another layer of something to do or someplace to stay. I mean, we already have whole neighborhoods of houses that are practically hotels anyway. I don't see the problem with it. I mean, yeah, we got to regulate it and figure out the landscaping buffer and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's a fun addition myself.
Commissioner Hudson?
I mean, I agree with Commissioner Hirschbein. It is hip. It does respond to the demographic. It would depend on the specific site. I had a comment though. You know, Airstream trailers are really trendy, really fabulous. But what would keep somebody potentially from using not such a great trailer as part of this idea? But you know, that could be handled through the architectural review process. But then I started to think, you know, this is a great hotel idea. But what about, this is going to throw a whole other idea perhaps out there, You know, I was almost thinking about the trend towards tiny homes and providing a really alternative, talk about housing stock and trying to provide some options. Could this, other than being just hotel use, could we look at a specific use that would be a similar idea, but would be for long-term residential housing? Just throwing it out there. And it could be the same regulations or ideas about, you know, perimeter walls and permanent utilities, certainly. And the specific units obviously would have to be architecture, you know, go under architectural review. But I think this is a fascinating concept. It's just about working out some of the criteria in terms of shielding and so forth, and size of, maybe there's a minimum size of lot that this would be applicable to.
Don't we already have trailer parks, though, in Palm Springs? Yeah. So, yeah, I think there are.
Yeah,
those are permanent dwellings, basically.
Yeah, just playing off of that comment, that brings to mind something, you know, possibly we look at modifying our RV park section of the code to allow it to be used both for this instance as a hotel or as Commissioner Hudson is suggesting as a tiny home development with standards that are specific to that. So that might be one way that we go about this, is to look at modifying our zoning code to address both of those issues.
But didn't you say that had to be 20 acres?
That's why we would need to amend our code, is to have something a little bit more specific to this tiny home movement that we see as a way to address affordable housing in Palm Springs with something that is characteristic of our community.
Obviously, this is not an intensive use of the land, and Palm Springs land tends to be expensive. So I think those kind of factors would mitigate against a development like this. But if someone can make it work, I'd like to hear it, see it.
So the reason for the bifurcation is that, okay, that the other cities had to work on is because, as you know, we really do need this to be an RV park under use, but the vehicle in which this type of projects can be considered would be the hotel use. Or in this case, you know, say either we amend the RV use so that we can have what happens if the acre sizes are 1 and minimum of 1. So in one, if one RV space is 1,250, you can potentially have 4 of these. So what is the minimum amount that we want to start with, right? And some of the sort of site programming issues is one of the reasons why this site works, or this kind of project works, is because they keep the parking away from the composition of the mobile home or trailer home vehicles, because they want to create this kind of courtyard or community setting away from cars. If we allow cars to now meander around these, then it just becomes a typical mobile home park, which is car and then home, no in between. So the success of this is that and I think this is what Flynn is posing to us, is that if we do it as a typical RV park, the advantage is that the RV park gets approved by the state architect, and the city only has to approve the site improvements. However, we can only start with a site that's 20 acres plus. However, if we do a hybrid version of that, in which this could be a hotel or a tiny use, can we approve it in planning with a more general category, and then when it comes to building use, we can still have the advantage of being a vehicle use, so that even the fire department could consider not fire sprinklering these, because that's a huge expense that's going to kill projects like this. So could we modify, as you were mentioning, the RV use to allow smaller lots, but have a minimum, and then also allow a subsection for tiny home movements? Could we also encourage that the way the site planning is designed is that the parking needs to be away, so that there's opportunity to create a community setting? And then if we do it sort of in the clean cut of RB, but, smaller RB subsection, then you could stay with the proper planning approval and then building approval.
Lynn, what do you think of that?
Again, that offers another opportunity. I think that melds together with what Commissioner Hudson was saying. And so it sounds like an amendment to the zoning code might be the appropriate way to move forward with that idea.
So would you wait until you get another application to put all this together, or would you do it now and anticipation?
I think I would like to kind of do them concurrently. I think there needs to be an example to see what the code would allow and what the end result is going to be. Because if I just take the code amendment forward without any type of example, it becomes a little bit difficult from a policy standpoint to see what the end result is going to be. So it's something I might do concurrently and have the approval of the actual RV hotel be contingent upon approval of the amendment.
That makes sense to me. Any other thoughts on this before we move on? No, I'm looking at everybody. No, I'm a big supporter of these too. I love the idea.
Could I just, support what Director Flynn is saying, because even with the windmill application, it was very helpful to have an application ahead of time of changing the zoning code, because it really, together with Peter, your intense review commitment, I think it really helped to have a concurrent application and change of zone.
I think if someone comes forward and wants to do this here, then we should look at it. I'm not sure how viable it is based on cost. I also just have concerns about anything that's too trendy, because trends go away, and this particular trend I think is more likely to go away sooner than later, and that's mainly because I can't imagine the maintenance that would be involved in a project like this long term. I mean, these are going to have to be replaced fairly regularly. This doesn't seem like a good business opportunity in my mind.
Luckily, they can just tow them away.
They can, but they have to buy new ones, and I don't know. It just seems like a much bigger project, and especially with the land being so expensive here. I think it works in Morongo Valley and Yucca Valley and places where it's very cheap, but I mean, I would be surprised if someone came forward and had a project that was going to be viable. But if they are, then by all means, come forward.
All right, with that, I think we can close today's agenda and then get reports from members of the commission. So I am closing today's agenda, or completing today's agenda. Thank you. All right. Are there any planning commission reports, requests, and comments? Yes, Commissioner Garn.
We also received a letter from someone who wanted to change a street name. Does staff generally respond to people so that they know kind of what the process would be for something like this?
When we have the questions come to us directly, yes, we do.
Okay, so then you would be responding to this
Yeah,
person?
we would be happy to do that.
Okay, I mean, it just seems like why not at least let them know?
Yeah. Just to give you some additional background, in terms of the street name change process, that's basically what's being requested here, is to change the name of a street. In terms of the process, the standard application is approximately, I think, $2,200 to do a street name change application. You need to get signatures of a certain percentage of the owners along the street to consent to the street name change. There's a two-step process before the Planning Commission in terms of doing a resolution with the intent to change the name, et cetera. And so it's a rather lengthy and involved process. However, there is another provision at the very end of that section of the code that says the Planning Commission can bypass that and recommend approval of a street name change. To a certain degree, we did that back in 2015. There was a request from the community relative to Crossley Road. And based on a desire and an interest in in honoring a member of our community who had been rather influential, the Planning Commission waived the fee and some of the other procedural requirements and took that under consideration. But we'll go ahead and respond to the person who has sent the letter. So thank you.
Do you have any? Do you have an orchid tree update?
I do have an orchid tree update. Yes. As part of the extension of their entitlements, they were required to make certain improvements to the site relative to the security and the safety of the buildings themselves. The applicant has completed about 90% of those required improvements, including installing a new fence. They have put additional lighting on the site. They have put cameras. However, the security cameras that they put on site were not direct feed video that the police department had requested, and so police is having them upgrade those cameras per their requirements. So again, they are about 90% complete with those requirements. They also submitted an independent structural report of the actual community church building itself. There was concern relative to the roof structure, and they've indicated that the concrete structure is adequate and will support it. They still need to do some cleanup on the tiles on that roof, but again, the structure is going to stand up even with the rains and so forth. So that is the status of Orchid Tree at this point.
I'm trying to recall when they came before us. Did they give any timeline at all for to move forward with the project?
With the project itself, they had indicated that they intended to move forward within the next year, but we will see that. They had a 90-day requirement on the improvements that I just spoke about, and then they also have a 6-month report where they're to indicate their progress in moving forward with the project. So we anticipate that in about 3 months' time.
Does Planning Commission sign off on the safety changes?
You don't sign off on that, but I believe that we are required to report to you at 6 months as well.
But not the initial installation?
Not the initial installation.
And apparently they waited close to the 90 days before doing this? Yeah.
They did.
Thank you.
About that, we also gave GRIT some requirements on the extent, or actually council gave GRIT some requirements on the Virgin extension.
Yes,
how's
they
that
did.
going?
And we are pursuing that as well.
Are they doing it or not doing it?
They will be doing it before the end of the month. That's their deadline.
The end of March is the deadline.
Yep.
And does the entitlement extension go away if it's not completed by then?
I can't remember what the violation section of that is. I apologize.
You just go forward. You don't have to ask.
So we received 2 emails this week. Are you going to discuss? One was related to the historic preservation. We happen to hold it here in Palm Springs.
Yes, I will be talking about that.
Okay. And then the second one was,
I don't remember either.
No, I'm sorry. No, it's about a specific case. We supposed to sign, read.
This was the legal action regarding the Aberdeen project.
Oh.
Where we're all being named.
Oh,
this,
okay. Yes, I had to sign and return that document, and so you all are being requested to do the same.
Could we have a little bit of update about what that case is? Is that appropriate to hear? I mean, I'm hesitant to sign something unless I really know what's going on.
I didn't receive it either.
I didn't receive it either.
Those of you who were not on the Planning Commission in 2015 would have not received that.
What about AAC? She received it, and I didn't.
They're pointing fingers. What I will do is I will ask the attorney who's representing us if they could do a follow-up email explaining what the case is and why that you are being asked to sign that document.
Can you ask them to verify the commission and AAC members at the time as well?
Yeah.
Is this common to receive such a request?
Oh, sure.
It's not that common for planning commissioners to receive that. It's not uncommon for members of city staff to receive that type of a request.
However, the laundry list of defendants in this complaint was unusual.
I see. But just in terms of liability, we're protected?
All of these people are being sued in their official capacities representing the city. There's no personal liability being sought against any of the city officials.
I see.
Was for the second project once they sold off Capture Plaza, or was it for that original project?
No, it's for the second project.
Okay.
All right. If no more questions, then director's report.
I have two items for you. First of all, Commissioner Hudson, you had made a wonderful suggestion to me that I just wanted to mention to the rest of the Planning Commission. Is Commissioner Hudson had suggested that we form a Planning Commission subcommittee to review submittal requirements for the application types that we have. In particular, looking at getting documents that you all can adequately review and comment on. And so if it is appropriate, we would like to form that subcommittee. Mr. Hudson has volunteered to be on that. Is there anyone else who would like to serve on that subcommittee? It would be a limited time. I'm assuming that it wouldn't take more than a couple of meetings to complete your work.
Any volunteers? Hey, Commissioner Song.
I guess I am.
Oh, looks like we have three architects that are agreeing
So
to
we
be in the
have
subcommittee.
three members,
Sounds like we
Commissioners
have a
Hudson,
very lovely subcommittee.
Song, and Hirschbein. Okay.
I mean, I'll just follow up. My intent was, I think a lot of times we receive presentation material that makes a project look really good, but isn't very honest in terms of height of walls along streets, setbacks, and all those sorts of things. My intent is to make these submittals much more honest and accurate.
And will you also address the pads, the building pads? Because that's heights, is that what it's called? Because those can be very, yeah.
And then the second item that I have for you is, as Commissioner Song has indicated, I sent an email about the California Preservation Foundation Conference, which is going to be held here in Palm Springs on May 8th through the 11th. The city is the host sponsor, and as part of our sponsorship, the foundation is offering free conference registration to members of our boards and commissions. So if you would like to attend the conference and you haven't already sent me an email, just see me after the Planning Commission meeting and I'll get you signed up for that. There is a caveat. The ticketed items, including the reception at Sunnylands and the tours and so forth, are an added cost, and they are not doing that for us. You'll have to pay for those individually, but they will pay for your attendance at the conference sessions, the regular conference sessions. So again, please see me and I'll sign you up for that.
Very good. Any other?
That's it.
Well, then I guess we are adjourned.
Thank you.